Hello and welcome to another episode of the Symphonic podcast. My name is Bernardo, and with me, as always, is
Arnold Schoenberg. I'm sorry, I'm Andrew Owen.
Andrew Owen. Yes, I've been saying your name a lot lately in all the episodes.
No joke.
Just can't resist.
Andrew Owen.
So today we're gonna be talking about, like Andrew said, Arnold Schoenberg, and we're gonna talk about his 5 pieces for orchestra. So Arnold Schoenberg, he, along with his students Alban Berg and Anton Webern, was the principal composer of the Second Viennese School, and this school thrived before World War I, and is now best known for breaking with tonality and creating serial composition. The composers of this school theoretically inherited their legacy from the so-called First Viennese School, which is Mozart, Haydn, and Beethoven, although the earlier composers were by no means as closely associated with one another as were those of the Second School. Coincidentally, the deaths of Schoenberg, Berg, and Webern were all somewhat unusual. In Schoenberg's case, having been a superstitious man all his life, he predicted that as he had been born on the 13th day of the month, he would also die on the 13th day of the month, a prediction which ultimately proven to be accurate.
Yeah, he had a pretty bad triskaidekaphobia. He avoided 13 in any way or any composition that would have 13 letters in its title. Did everything. I think Moses and Aaron missing the second A in Aaron because otherwise it'd be 13 letters or something like that. I don't quite know off the top of my head, but yeah, the Second Viennese School he named after saying that yes, he is the new Mozart, Beethoven, and Haydn.
Haydn, yeah.
To be fair, none of them came from Vienna. The first school, at least Schoenberg, is a little more close to home. Because he was born in Vienna in September 13 of 1874. His dates are ingrained in my head for some reason, 1874 to 1951, which is when Stravinsky adopts his 12-tone method in his own way. He was born in 1874, same year as we have said before, as Ives and Holst. So Schoenberg was born into an Orthodox Jewish family, and since both of his parents were born in the region that became Czechoslovakia after World War I, he was later assigned Czech citizenship. And of the 3 children in the family, 2 became musicians, which was surprising in that the family was not well off and his parents were not musical. His father owned a shoe shop. He was a shoe seller. Now, I completely understand. I'm a big shoe nut.
Oh, yes, you are.
It's wonderful. So Schoenberg's musical education began when he started studying violin at the age of 8. It was not long after that he started composing as well. So he was a precocious little guy.
Yeah. So when Schoenberg's father died, the financial needs of the family obliged him to begin working as a bank clerk at the age of 16. And he remained in this position for the next 5 years. However, he had by no means eschewed musical, artistic, and intellectual pursuits. In the evenings, he regularly met with 2 friends, and together the 3 studied music, art, and philosophy. From this little group, an amateur musical ensemble was formed, and through the works that they played, Schoenberg was exposed to and learned about the classical repertoire. While simultaneously learning elementary harmony from his friend Oskar Adler, a capable violinist that lived there in Vienna. In addition to this activity, Schoenberg supplemented his income from the bank by arranging popular songs and orchestrating operettas.
Very good. So yes, so this brings us into a short discussion on Schoenberg's early professional development. So around this time, Schoenberg joined an amateur ensemble conducted by the Viennese composer Alexander von Zemlinsky. Zemlinsky was to prove an important figure in Schoenberg's life, both in terms of his development as a composer and in terms of the connections that this more established musician was able to secure for him. In 1897, for instance, through Zemlinsky's sponsorship, Schoenberg was able to have his string quartet in D major performed for a concert of the members of the Wiener Tonkünstlerverein, which is a delightful name for an ensemble. Tonkünstlerverein! So Zemlinsky also provided Schoenberg with valuable critique of this piece as it was being developed. He was a really good sort of early supporter and kind of a teacher of sorts, not like a full-blown teacher, but just a good touchstone to have around.
Ultimately, the outcome of the concert was that Schoenberg's work was well received, and earned another performance the next year. After this point, however, reactions to Schoenberg's work was less than positive. For example, in 1899, his string sextet, Verklärte Nacht, which means Transfigured Night, was rejected by the society, and the public performance of his song Opuses 1 to 3 received protest. The negative reactions towards his works were largely due to the fact that even at his early point in his career, he was challenging the set notions about tonality. And of course, that's his main thing, right?
Yeah, it's always kind of surprising to hear that about Verklärte Nacht, because it's such a, it's a pretty tonal piece. I remember very distinctly one of the freshmen that I was TAing a few years ago recognized Verklärte Nacht in one note, which is pretty impressive. Just a
Wow.
single held thing. But yeah, Verklärte Nacht, it actually has the Tristan chord of Wagner's, like when the first 2 pages, it just comes out of nowhere. It's like, it's not the most...
If people were bothered by Verklärte Nacht, I mean, they're going to really hate him soon.
Oh, yeah. So in 1901, Schoenberg married Alexander von Zemlinsky's sister Matilda, and they subsequently had 3 children together. Let me tell you, this is not the best marriage. So not long after this marriage, in October of 1901, the couple moved to Berlin, where Schoenberg went to work on music for the Überbreitel Cabaret. So he wrote there a lot of cabaret songs, which are actually very enjoyable. I've sat and listened to all of them. They're delightful. The guiding principle behind this theater was to use popular entertainment to further serious ideas. Unfortunately, the enterprise was not a successful one. So yeah, this woman, Matilda, she has affairs with the guy. So I mean, it's not a pleasant situation. He dedicates his 2nd string quartet to her. During all this, I mean, it's just a real sad situation.
Yeah. And while in Berlin, however, Schoenberg showed composer Richard Strauss parts of the Lieder, which he had composed earlier, as well as part of the symphonic poem Pelleas und Melisande. And Strauss recognized his gift and found Schoenberg a position as a composition teacher at the Stern Conservatory and secured him an additional stipend, thus allowing Schoenberg the increased ability and time to concentrate on composition.
So yeah, in 1903, the Schoenberg family returned to Vienna, where Schoenberg took a post teaching harmony and counterpoint at a girls' school, which is not quite like the Stern Conservatory. It's more girls' school. So after teaching there, he went on to teach privately and solicited his students both from the girls' school and from Guido Adler, who was pretty much the founder of musicology back in the day, around the turn of the 20th century. Among the students who came to him during this period were Anton Webern and Alban Berg, who, along with Schoenberg, became these 3 luminaries of the Second Viennese School, the self-named Second Viennese School. They were the big 3. Yeah.
And private teaching was, however, not very lucrative, and in fact, Schoenberg taught Berg for free during the first year. The same was true of composition. His works were not the least performed due to the fact that he and Sleminski had formed a society, which was the Vereinigung Schaffende Tonkünstler. And this is a society of creative musicians, and with this had the goal of having their works played. They added legitimacy to this society by appointing the eminent composer Gustav Mahler as the honorary president. During its 1-year existence, from 1904 to 1905, the society performed the compositions of Schoenberg, Mahler, Strauss, and Sleminski, among other composers.
In 1908, Schoenberg decided to pursue painting seriously, which was a decision that had direct ramifications on his domestic life. This is because, as he explored his craft, one of the artists with whom he developed a close personal relationship was the Austrian painter Richard Gerstel. Unfortunately, Gerstel also grew close with Matilda Schoenberg, and the two began an affair that culminated in Matilda moving in with Gerstel. She was only persuaded to return to Schoenberg for the sake of the children, and sadly, Gerstel committed suicide. And when I say he committed suicide, the guy went all out. He took all of his paintings and he just stacked them all around the sides of the room and set them on fire when he hanged himself in the middle of it. It was very dramatic. Yeah. People had a real excitement for the dramatic back in those days. Yeah, very glamorous way to go.
Yeah. So Returning to his focus on composition, in 1909, Schoenberg wrote Fünf Orchesterstücke, the five orchestral piece, of course, the piece we're going to talk about today. And this is a significant feature of these pieces was that the use of Klangfarbenmelodie. Oh man!
I love.
And I've studied this. I mean, I've studied this before, and I can't even say it.
Klangfarbenmelodie,
which is it translates to tone color melody. A technique that Schoenberg had named, but which he had developed using the ideas of Strauss. Klangfarbenmelodie is a musical technique that involves splitting a musical line or melody between several instruments rather than using it to just one instrument or set of instruments, thereby adding color or timbre and texture to the melodic line. The technique is sometimes compared to pointillism, which is a painting, a technique in painting of the neo-impressionist painters. In 1909, also saw the composition of two dramatic works, which was Erwartung, which means expectation, and this was an opera, and the Glückliche Hand, which is the Hand of Fate, and this is a musical drama in 4 scenes. It was during this time period that he completely abandoned tonal harmony for good.
So sad. It's the last year he was a musician. So in 1910, Schoenberg assumed a position as a lecturer at the Kaiserliche Königliche Akademie für Musik und Darstellende Kunst. Now, for those who don't speak German, I'm terribly sorry. I am one of those people who don't speak German. I guess that means the Caesar-like, king-like Academy for Music. Sort of Caesar-like, king-like. I don't know. Unfortunately, in part because he was Jewish-born, although he converted to Lutheranism in 2008, he was unable to become a professor. So he had few financial resources at this point. So he and his family moved to Berlin in 1911. There, despite some initial bad press concerning his compositions, the family's financial situation began to improve and to stabilize. Audiences slowly warmed to his earlier compositions and were intrigued by the new ones being written. Among his successes from this period was the song cycle Pierrot Lunaire of 1912, and that's a big piece. It had its it was only like 3 years ago, I guess, 5 years ago. Yeah, I can't do math.
Yeah, 4 years ago. In LSU, right?
Yeah, we performed the whole thing here at LSU, and I imagine a lot of institutions did the same as the centennial. Pierrot Lunaire. Just a wonderful, I guess you could call it a monodrama or a monologue, where it's just uses this really particular set of instruments, the clarinet and everything that, and with it the soprano that sort of speaks at each of the pitches. Den Wein, den man mit Augen trinkt. Little technique which is called Sprechstimme.
Yeah, that's one of his most famous pieces.
Oh, I'd say it's definitely his most famous piece by far. I can't think of anything that's bigger. The five pieces for orchestra certainly is probably a close second.
And at the outbreak of World War I, Schoenberg found that there was less work available, largely because his pupils were being called to serve. He himself was initially deemed unfit to serve in the armed force for health reasons, but in December of 1915, he was reclassified as fit and volunteered for 1 year. However, his health, which was never in fact very good, deteriorated and he developed asthma. His friends successfully petitioned for his release from duty, and it was granted in 1916.
My brain's just replaying Downton Abbey right now, seeing all these people going off to war. So these years were difficult for Schoenberg, both financially and artistically. With the war ongoing and food and fuel shortages commonplace in Vienna, which is where he had returned in September of 15, he found little time to compose. Moreover, his family was evicted from its home, and its members were forced to reside in boarding houses, sort of temporary places. The situation was made more difficult when Schoenberg was recalled to active duty in 1917. So he was actually pretty involved in the war.
But fortunately, the duties assigned to him were light, and he was able to remain in Vienna and simultaneously teach composition at a local school. He was released from military service in December, and not long after, he and his family moved to Mödling, a town to the southwest of Vienna. But however, he continued his instruction at the school up until 1920.
So after the war, Schoenberg starts to write a little bit more music. It was from the seminar that he taught in the school that Schoenberg organized another society, which he called Verein für musikalische Privataufführungen. So this society performed new works for an interested private audience. To attend, one had to be a member, and the fee was based on income. So it was nice and, I guess, socialistic in its view. So the press, which could be hostile to new works, was not invited. So this does make life a little easier, I suppose.
Yes.
At the same time, I mean, if you're forbidding your music from people or from the press, I can imagine if you have a nice little following that it looks pretty baller from the outside. So while it was in existence, which was from 1919 to 21, 117 performances took place, which gave Schoenberg and his pupils a regular venue at which to perform their works. Ultimately, however, a stagnant economy and inflation ended the society, though things weren't just fabulous in German-speaking lands between the wars, as Hitler will let you know in Mein Kampf.
Yeah. Significantly, it was also during this period that he fully developed the technique of serial composition. Of interest is the fact that one of Schoenberg's contemporaries, Joseph Matthias Heuer, claimed to have invented this technique first, an assertion which actually irritated Schoenberg. Whatever the case, it was Schoenberg and his two pupils, Berg and Webern, who were largely responsible for advancing the compositional procedure. This 12-tone technique orders the 12 tones of the chromatic scale, forming a row or series and providing a unifying basis for composition, for a composition's melody, harmony, structural process, progression, and variations. And this is kind of like a very, cerebral type of music. It's completely different from anything that came before. The dodecaphonic technique is, so unique. And that's why he's remembered, right? Because he basically changed music, just like Stravinsky did as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's around the time that the perfectly equal-tempered scale is perfected in 1917, that shortly thereafter there's a system of writing music for equal temperament, which is where nothing tunes. There's just, at no point does anything tune, ever on any instrument like that, but this kind of composition, I guess, probably takes advantage of that. I had never really heard of Joseph Matthias Heuer. That was really sort of a surprise. I wonder if he's sort of like Nikola Tesla to Edison.
Yeah, it could be. Who knows?
Maybe. Who knows? I don't know. So in October of 1923, Schoenberg's wife Matilda died. His Frau was no more. So not long after he remarried Gertrude Kolisch, who was the sister of his student Rudolf Kolisch. He was the well-known founder of the Kolisch String Quartet. The couple went on to have 3 children. So that's nice. He was just basically Brady Bunch, just lots of kids. So 2 years later, Schoenberg was hired to teach the master class in composition at the Akademie der Künste in Berlin. He and his family arrived in 26 in January. The position was an ideal one for him, and that it allowed him not only a more stable income, but also increased time to compose. He remained there for 7 years, and his works from this period include the Variationen für Orchestra, the Third Quartet, and his operas Von heute auf morgen and Moses und Aaron, which again has 12 letters to keep from having both A's and Aaron to make it 13. So he's just a strange little guy.
Yeah, from 1930 to 31, Schoenberg and his wife were in Barcelona in order to help him cope with his asthma. While he was away, the political situation in Berlin was deteriorating rapidly, and in 1933 he was removed from his position at the Academy due to his Jewish background. This decision was made public on March 1st, and Schoenberg was at the meeting when it was announced. Despite the fact that he was allowed to finish his contract with the school, Schoenberg elected to leave his post immediately, and in May of 1933, the Schoenberg family moved to France. 2 months later, Schoenberg abandoned Lutheranism and returned to Judaism. So it was like a big middle finger there to Germany, to the Nazis. He's like, oh, you don't like me because I was Jewish? Okay, well, now I am really Jewish.
I mean, most people leave Lutheranism because they get tired of hearing the handbell choirs, but honestly, it's sometimes it is a political statement or a statement, assertion of whatever. So this brings us to when Schoenberg was no longer living in a German-speaking land. So soon after, in 1934, the Schoenbergs moved to America. They initially settled in Boston. The weather on the American East Coast, however, was detrimental to his health, and they soon moved to Los Angeles, where Schoenberg was offered a professorship at UCLA in 1936, which is kind of cool. He was made a symphonian in my music fraternity in '35, so he must have done that shortly before he was professor, right when he was moved there. But it's kind of fun. Yeah, he was very excited about Sinfonia. He was a big Phi Mu Alpha guy. Never missed a thing after he was initiated. So at first Schoenberg was not very happy in Los Angeles. Between the deteriorating situation in Europe and the fact that the students he was teaching did not have backgrounds that allowed them to readily understand his methods, he considered moving elsewhere. However, he made the decision to remain and returned his attention to compiling textbooks for American students. And he would, a friend of a friend was a student of his, and he talks about how much he complained that a lot of people wanted to learn his 12-tone method before learning. And they can't even spell a dominant seventh chord. It's a funny little German man.
Yeah.
Egon.
So in 1944, his health significantly worsened. He was diagnosed with diabetes and suffered from severe heart problems as well. These health issues forced him to leave his professorship in September of that year. Because he had spent such a short time on the faculty, his pension only amounted to $38 a month, an insufficient sum for him to maintain himself and his family. Therefore, he was obliged to continue teaching privately and offering lectures at universities.
So during the last year of his life, which was 1951, in part because of his staunch support of the newly formed State of Israel, he was elected the first honorary president of the Samuel Rubin Israel Academy of Music. In general, his final compositions, those from 33 onward, were of a religious nature and explored his reconfirmed Jewish faith. So he died there in Los Angeles on July 13 of 1951, as we said, July 13. Delightful day to die if you're a Triskai decaphobe.
Yeah. Yep. So that brings us to the piece that we're going to be talking about today, the Fünf Orchesterstücke, which is, of course, the 5 pieces for orchestra. And this is his Opus 16, and it was composed in 1909. The titles of this piece reluctantly added by the composer after the work's completion upon the request of his publishers. And the titles that he added later on are as follows. Vorgefühle, which is premonitions, and this is a very fast movement. Then we have the Vergangenes, that means the past, and this is in a moderate speed. Then we have Farben, and this is Summer Morning by a Lake. And also this is the chord colors movement that we're going to be talking about. This is the most discussed movement of this piece. People always talk about this movement. And we have the Peripetie, which that's peripetia, right? Peripetia, and that is a very fast movement. And the last movement is Das Obligate Recitativ, which is the obligato recitative, and this is a little faster with movement in terms of tempo.
Bewegte Achtel.
Bewegte Achtel, with a little movement.
Happy language.
Yeah, so the work exists in 2 different scorings. The original, of course, 1909 version for a large orchestra, and the revised version of 1949, which reduces the size of the orchestra to more or less normal proportions, giving up the contrabass clarinet, as well as the 4-fold scoring of the other woodwinds and 2 of the 6 horns. And this version was published posthumously in 1952.
In Arnold Schoenberg's Berlin Diary, edited by Josef Rufer, there's this entry about this piece. The wonderful thing about music is that it allows you to express everything so the initiates will understand, but without betraying your inmost secrets, the secrets you don't confess even to yourself. But titles betray you after all. Moreover, the music already expresses the ideas that are important, so why use words? If words were necessary, you would use them in the first place, whereas in art you can express more than in words. Anyway, the titles I might use betray no secrets because they are either very cryptic or very technical. Thus, premonitions, everyone has them in movement 1. Number 2, the past, everyone has one of those too. Number 3, chord colors, it's just a technical term. 4, peripetia, vague enough, I suppose, and 5, the obbligato, or perhaps fully developed or endless, recitative. But there should be a note to say that these titles were added as a necessity of publication and not to provide poetic atmosphere. So they were, he was just doing what he could to explain, and he was just him writing in his own little thing about where these titles come from and how important are words to Schoenberg. It's hard to say because a lot of his music negates musical trajectory. I mean, function or going from one place to the other. For him, it's just a little different. I don't know. It's interesting. So the 5 pieces further developed the notion of total chromaticism that Schoenberg introduced in his 3 piano pieces, Opus 11, which was composed earlier that year. These were composed during a time of intense personal and artistic crisis for the composer, which is usual because he normally was in a personal and artistic crisis. This being reflected in the tensions and, at times, extreme violence of the score, mirroring the expressionist movement of the time, where people were just obsessed with the subconscious and burgeoning madness within. People were just very much fascinated by grotesque insanities and that kind of thing. So the work had its world premiere in London at a Promenade concert on September 3rd, 1912, and this was conducted by Henry Wood, a pretty well-known British conductor that conducted plenty of Holst's pieces and Vaughan Williams's pieces. So it's kind of amazing to think of yet another connection.
It's all connected, yeah. And we're about to talk about another connection here. So at Wood's suggestion, Schoenberg's British pupil and friend Edward Clarke, later to become a renowned BBC music producer and conductor, invited the composer to make his British conducting debut with this work at the Queen's Hall. And on January 17th of 1914, he conducted it at the same venue. This was attended by Gustav Holst, who obtained a copy of the score, the only Schoenberg score that he ever owned. And echoes of the work appear in the Planes, originally titled 7 Pieces for Large Orchestra. We talked about that before, and you see the resemblance here, and also in the opening of Holst's ballet, The Lure of 1921, which closely resembles the third of Schoenberg's 5 pieces. So we see another connection here. So cool. Despite or because of a series of bitter disappointments during the years of 1908 and 1909, both in his personal life and in his artistic endeavors, Schoenberg experienced a creative frenzy which he never again equaled. This period culminated in the composition of the 5 pieces for orchestra and the monodrama Erwartung, Opus 17, written in the short space of a fortnight at the end of the year. I love the word fortnight. I don't know why we don't use it. We don't use it because I love, instead of saying 2 weeks, you just say fortnight.
It's so simple. I try to use it, but it's actually pretty uncommon that we have to refer to 2 weeks.
Nobody knows. Right? I love that word, though. It's really awesome.
Fortnightly. I received my fortnightly check. It's kind of fun. So in these 2 years, Schoenberg's musical language underwent a gradual change from extended tonality to atonality. Schoenberg initially abhorred the negative connotation of atonality and preferred to consider his middle expressionist period as pantonal, that is, using tones from pots and pans. That's not true. It's just multiple, just tonality everywhere. So this led to the abandonment of traditional tonality, or ultimately, as he called it, the emancipation of the dissonance. Yes, he was quite the spin doctor, and that's okay. Because even to me, emancipation of the dissonance is still kind of sort of requires a negative look at saying that they were held up or that you're having to call it a dissonance to begin with. So prior to Opus 16, the non-tonal, quasi-stream of conscious, intuitive composition process was found only sporadically in certain movements of a section of work, such as the second string quartet, Opus 10, the last movement, and the one that's so famous because it has I feel the air of a distant planet. There's actually a soprano that sings in the last movement of that string quartet. The 3 piano pieces, Opus 11, and also the final movement, which was also in the final movement, I should say, and several songs from the Book of the Hanging Gardens, Opus 15, all intimate chamber music intended for a knowledgeable public. For the first time, the full force of a new musical language was unleashed on a less sophisticated audience by an augmented orchestra. In this piece, 5 five-piece orchestra in all of its five movements. And what an audience it must have been at the first performance of Opus 16 on September 3 at one of the Promenade concerts in London. Henry Wood conducting them to hear this very strange music.
Yeah, and a critique of this first performance appeared in the London Times on September 4 of 1912, and it was like the quote is, "It was like a poem in Tibetan. Not one single soul could possibly have understood it at first hearing. We can, after all, only progress from the known to the unknown. And as the program writer, who had every reason to know, said, there was not a single consonant from beginning to end. At the conclusion, half of the audience hissed. That seemed a too decisive judgment, for after all, they may turn out to be wrong. The other half applauded more vehemently than the case warranted, for it could hardly have been from understanding," unquote. And
so,
this is a really cool quote, because he's saying that most people didn't like it, but he's also saying they may be wrong later. So because usually critics are always say oh, Beethoven's Fifth was crap, oh, Stravinsky's Rattle Spring was crap, and then 200 years later we say that they were wrong. So at least this critic is saying that yes, I mean most people didn't like it, but maybe maybe they're wrong.
Yeah, I mean it's a sign of a former time back when audience feedback was actually valid. Nowadays, it's impolite to hiss at the performer, which is a shame, because you miss out on actually. I think it validates feedback. Applause a little bit more if you have the possibility of hissing and booing. But in any case, the eminent music critic for the Nation, Edward Newman, wrote, "It is not often that an English audience hisses the music that it does not like, but a good third of the people the other day permitted themselves that luxury after the first performance of the 5 orchestra pieces of Schoenberg. And another third of the audience was not hissing because it was laughing, and the remaining third seemed too puzzled either to laugh or to hiss. May it not be that the new composer sees a logic and certain tonal relations that to the rest of us seem chaotic at present, but the coherence of which may be clear enough to all of us some day," unquote. So that's, people are saying, let's give this some time to set in, but as it stands, it's not really a good piece at all. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
It's too weird for us to really enjoy. Maybe we just don't understand it, because we can tell that there's some sophistication to it, but we can't quite put our fingers on it.
So there exist more versions and transcriptions of Opus 16 than any other work by Schoenberg. The original score, published by C.F. Peters in 1912, without titles. Then there's the revised version of 1922 with titles and with several changes, especially in tempo markings. Then there's also a reduction for chamber ensemble in 1920, and there's a new version revised and reduced to normal size orchestra in September of 1949, like we said before. And but besides these authentic versions, there is an Anton Webern's reduction for 2 pianos, also done in 1912, based on the first edition but with titles, and a chamber ensemble version by Felix Greisler, something. Greisler, yeah. So there's a lot of
It's a hit. That's great. It's a big thing. People enjoyed it. So the first piece, Premonitions, is based essentially on 3 elements: a short fanfare-like motive, often outlining an augmented triad, a trichord D, A sharp, C sharp virtually omnipresent, and a relentless multiphasic ostinato. The ostinato dominates the middle section with the entire orchestra at varied rates of speed, while the trichord triumphs at the close. Low brass, flutter tone, crescendo, plenty of different colors happening over the ostinato, which is up the cello and double bass, which is getting quieter and quieter, and the descending modified fanfare motive in the low woodwinds also exist there at the end. At the end of the first movement.
Yeah. The second movement, which is Yesterday, is cast in a ternary form and is currently colored, opening in D minor, which usually with unusually pungent woodwind combinations. The middle sections employs oblique chromatics, and then there's the return of the contracted initial section is like a flashback and projects the mood of nostalgia, of déjà vu. The surface content of the Impressionist and Debussy's favorite expression marking, tristo e monotono, comes to mind. Tristo e monotono means sad and monotone, sorry.
The third piece, Summer Morning by a Lake, which is a popular title of it. The actual original title was Farben Klangfarben, colors. So it was that way in that revision, and then the Webern piano reduction, Der wechselnde Akkord, in Schoenberg's chamber ensemble reduction in 1920. So it had a lot of titles. It was quite literally a watershed piece, serving as a prototype for many post-Second World War serial composers in its pointillistic use of instrumental colors. So overlapping timbral changes of a five-note chord, each of the voices moving up a semitone and down a whole tone at its own speed, arrive at the initial pentachord, a semitone lower. The entire process is reversed in the reprise, where the motion is a semitone down and a whole tone upward. During the stretto of the three-note cell, there occurs a palindromic progression of the kaleidoscopic timbral mixtures, just a lot of heterophony going on, lots of different sounds. The gentle oscillation of the changing chord reflects, according to Schoenberg, the play of light on the waves of the Taunsee, as well as the rocking of the tone of the rowboard on the calm surface of the lake. To complete his impressionist painting, Klangfarben Melodia, there appear a quite realistic interference motive, predominantly in the harp and the celesta, to depict fish jumping out of the water in an attempt to catch insects. So it's actually pretty programmatic for good old Schoenberg.
Yeah, and this movement, I mean, there's so much that has been written about this particular movement. I mean, there are entire papers just on this movement. So it's good that, you know, people should take a listen to that one. Of course, you should listen to the whole piece, but that one's a really good movement for Schoenberg. So the fourth movement, which is Peripetia, I can say it, dude. Peripetia, which is the southern turning point in the plot of the Greek drama, which assures the inevitable tragedy. It's the shortest and most explosive piece of the set. The last 8 bars are a crescendo, achieved by staggered entrances, ending in an overwhelming climax with composed echo of 2.5 measures after.
Yeah, so that's the fourth movement. The fifth and final piece bear the title The Obligatory Recitative. Its richly polyphonic texture belies the fact that a single melodic turn, a melodic line runs uninterruptedly from beginning to end. The recitative is passed through the entire orchestra as a strand of seamless fragments. The consistency of the lilting Ländler-like 3/8 time qualities, the Ländler-like qualities, this pleasant little dance, this Austrian dance, I think it's Austrian, results in a lyrical bucolic mood. I love that word, bucolic. It's so cute. Cows. With perhaps a touch of bittersweet resignation, so characteristic of the Austrian psyche. The apocalypse with a happy ending, they say. But it's just a delightful work.
Yeah, and I mean, I mean, we talked about last week in our episode that we should talk about Schoenberg, and so that's why we're doing Schoenberg this week.
Yeah.
But you know me, Andrew, and you know that I don't particularly love this type of music. I mean, I understand its place in history. I understand why it's so important, and I have studied 20th century theory and all that. But you know that as you call me, I'm a romantic. You know that this is not my favorite type of music.
It's okay. I mean, I think this is one of the first pieces really that is designed for a specialized audience. It's not really. I mean, it's music that's too complicated to enjoy at the first listen.
Yeah, exactly. Because in theory we have to study the rows and how they go backwards and forwards and all these crazy things, and I mean how complex it is composing all this kind of music. But and in the end, I don't particularly like how it sounds.
But I mean, it's still in the context of things. We have. I was just thinking about earlier one of the questions that Dr. Jan Herlinger, posed to his 20th century chamber music class back in 2009. Back when I was taking that class, he asked what were the dates of this composer Schoenberg, and it was the people who knew it. Who was also alive in Vienna writing string quartets at the same time that Schoenberg was writing string quartets, and what are his dates? And the answer is Brahms. And it's hard to imagine that Brahms and Schoenberg were writing string quartets in the same city at the same time. But they were. I mean, they have this nice little connection there. And then, of course, Schoenberg was a big promoter of Brahms as being some kind of progressive, of trying to make music that isn't instantaneously enjoyable, but has a lot of appeal to the mind.
Definitely.
He was a big promoter of Brahms, this romantic, actually being more of a progressive than a romantic, despite the claim to the otherwise of people like Liszt or Wagner, who a lot of people say, well, look at how they emancipated all these dissonances. Well, I'd say that Brahms did a lot more than just emancipate dissonance. He made complicated music and difficult music sound beautiful, which is actually pretty amazing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Brahms is such a complex character. You know, always people think of him as a conservative, but as we talk of him, you know, before, he was actually not so much of a conservative as we like to think.
Yeah, and it was Schoenberg who made that distinction of him as a progressive. Brahms the Progressive was actually the name of the essay that he wrote about it. But yeah, I mean, Schoenberg was a huge thing. And when we talk about modernism, we have to remember that modernism happened 100 years ago. Modernism is something of the past.
Modern. Yeah, it's not as modern anymore. Yeah, I was actually talking to a composer that lives here in Tennessee, and he was saying, you know, like, okay, so, you know, I wanna write something that's new, but, you know, even the what we call new is not new anymore, right? All this atonality is not new anymore. So, you know, where do you go from here? And so he was asking these questions to me, and I mean, that's definitely interesting, you know. I mean, it's been 100 years since this happened, so it's not new anymore. And of course,
I suppose Schoenberg would probably advocate that you have that if after we've written all these atonal pieces, after we've used our 12-tone method, well, the tonal music had its several hundred years. Why shouldn't atonality? Why shouldn't 12-tone?
Yeah,
just keep writing it, right?
Yeah.
But it only works with equal temp instruments. It doesn't really work so well if you're like in a choir trying to tune the thing.
Yes, of course. And yeah, I mean, Schoenberg is one of the most important, without a doubt. We know this. We know that he's one of the most important composers of the 20th century, of course. I mean, I understand his importance, of course.
Yeah, I think his music can be enjoyed if you're like open to it. And I think that's probably what he was trying to get people to be open to it. And I think for the most part that premiere in London was pretty open. People hissed and stuff, but they were still willing to sit and listen to it and say, okay, this guy, clearly he means to tell us something with this music. Let's try and figure it out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's this whole idea is later expounded in an essay that was later titled "Who Cares If You Listen" by Milton Babbitt. Milt Babbitt didn't choose that title, but his title was "Composer as Specialist." This whole idea of writing music to be understood and studied and figured out, rather than music to appeal or to be beautiful in any kind of way.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, for the record, I don't hate all 20th century music. I actually played a lot of it in the flute, and I like some of it, of course. It's not the whole thing that I hate, but yeah, it's not my favorite, of course.
Right. I completely understand.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very much a tonalist myself. I far prefer listenable music to listen to.
Yeah. Okay, anything else you want to say today, Andrew?
That's all I got.
All right, awesome. All right, well, of course, thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you want to email us and have any questions, you can email us at symphonicpodcast@gmail.com. Of course, you can find us on iTunes, and you can find us on the podcast, on your favorite podcast app, of course. You can, of course, find us on YouTube, where we post the videos with all the pictures and all the links and all that stuff. And of course, till next time, thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.